This is a lead guitar. This is a bass guitar. Bass guitars plug into bass amps. The signal from a bass guitar pushes speakers out farther than lead guitar speakers are designed to go. Hooking a bass up to a lead guitar speaker could damage or destroy the speaker. The most basic electric guitar signal chain is the electric guitar plugged into the preamp, leading to the power amp and ending at the speakers. The guitar signal is called an instrument level signal, which is boosted by the preamp to line level voltage, which is then further boosted by the power amp to speaker level voltage. Amps that have preamp, power amp, and speakers built into one box are called combo amps, such as this PV Special 212. And there you can see the massive 12-inch speakers. Amps that have the preamp and power amp built into one box and the speakers built into a separate box are called stack amps. The box that contains the preamp and the power amp is called the head, and the box that contains the speakers is simply called a cabinet. Gain boosting pedals, such as a distortion pedal, are usually placed in front of the preamp. The amplifier is usually set to the clean channel. Time-based effects such as reverb, chorus, and delay are usually placed in between the preamp and power amp using the send and return jacks in a circuit called an effects loop, which is either parallel or series. In the parallel circuit, we maintain the direct signal from the preamp to the power amp without any effects applied, called the dry signal, but then we have an additional signal that goes from preamp through the effects and back to the power amp, and that's called the wet signal. And on amps that have the parallel effects loop, there's usually a knob so you can adjust the level of the effects signal. With a series effects loop, the effects signal actually replaces the dry signal. We lose the dry signal. But many amps that have the series effects loop will include a switch so you can switch back and forth between the two signals, but there won't be a knob to adjust the level of the effects signal. There are rack cases that are designed to hold rack mount components, such as this Furman power conditioner and surge protection unit, and this Korg Toneworks tuner, and this Roland GS6 has a preamp, and also it has effects built into it. So with this you wouldn't actually have an effects loop, but you would plug this unit directly into a power amp. I've got a line going from the output of the Roland GS6, in this case it's the mono output, and I can plug that into the return on the Marshall, and by doing that I am bypassing the preamp of the Marshall and plugging directly into the power amp. This is called amp slaving, where the amp whose power amp is being used is called the slave amp. This can be done with a standalone preamp or the preamp from another combo or head unit. I've got the guitar hooked up to the input of the Korg Toneworks tuner, which itself is outputting to the Roland GS6. Now that I'm bypassing the preamp with this guitar, I will not be using these other knobs. They won't affect this guitar sound at all. The Roland has a pretty elaborate foot switch because it has savable presets. Because this is a parallel effects loop, I could actually plug in another guitar to the preamp of the Marshall, and somebody else could play that guitar while I'm playing mine through the GS6. And so now I can hear both guitars at the same time. Now that I'm on the clean channel, I can actually turn this guitar off by just adjusting that knob for the FX mix for that channel. But if I switch to the other channel, I can hear it again because the effects knob is all the way up still. So this is why you want to have them both all the way up, so that if you're switching channels with the other guitar, you can still hear the first guitar. But keep in mind, this setup does only work with a parallel effects loop. So for example, on this PV212 that has a series effects loop, if I plug in the GS6 to the back of it in the power amp in or the effects return, I no longer get any sound coming out of this guitar through the amp until I unplug. So this PV has what's called a power amp in, which I can plug a preamp into, or I can bypass the preamp of the PV through the effects return and go to the power amp that way. Also, this PV has a preamp out, so I can plug the preamp of this PV into the power amp of another amp such as the Marshall, and then I would have two 12-inch speakers plus the 412 cabinet, and if I wanted to, I could also hook up another 8-ohm speaker cabinet to the PV, and then I would have a total of 10 12-inch speakers. And somebody might think that since there's an effects return and a power amp input that you could try to use both of them at the same time. But the answer is that will not work. You will only get the amp that is going into the power amp input. So with this, I'm actually hearing the preamp from the Roland playing through the PV212. And if I want to hear this other guitar that's going through the GS6, I'll have to come over here and unplug the Roland. Now I'm hearing the GS6. Now, since the PV has a foot switch to turn the effects on and off, I can go ahead and use that. Now, if I had used the power amp input instead of the effects return, this switch will not have any effect on that. In the next video, I will discuss details of preamp controls such as equalization and power amp controls, such as presence and resonance.